just have the Catholic sacramental records, but we do have some records from First Presbyterian Church, session records, church records, and baptismal. And then we move over to public collections, which is the majority of where our collections come from. These are just some logos giving examples of some of the public collections that we have. Corrections, one of the coolest things we have is the earliest inmate intake record book with inmate number 1. And the glass plate negatives, which the archivist is here today that is working on that collection. The Environment Department, we have air quality records, Department of Game and Fish exotic animal records, scientific collection reports, Santa Fe County guardianships, corporation record books, livestock board, brand records, lottery reports. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do. The majority of the records that we use come from various sources for exhibits, but now to start the presentation. So in 2004, while I was in the reference room of the archives, I picked up a little red book. I've always been interested in the shadows, so it felt natural to gravitate towards Adobe Angels, the Ghost of Santa Fe and Taos. I don't know how many of you have actually heard of that book. I have papers everywhere. So I'm going to also be passing out a couple of things from time to time for you to pass around the room, but these are the two book covers for Adobe Angels and Phantom of Tombstone. So I picked up that book and I was immediately drawn to this image, and I really fell in love with this picture, and I still to this day really like it, because I realized while I was working there that the quote really intrigued me. I became captured by this quote, and it does say death is not a period but a comma in the story of life, and I think that that's very true. At the time when I read this quote, I was experiencing a death in my family as well, and I think I realized that working around archives for 8 hours a day, that death was really celebrated, and that was something to remember, that we live on through the records. I felt comfort when I read that quote, and I really realized that we do live on in the collective memory, but through our achievements and our families, as well as our downfalls and our failures, which makes the records interesting. So that's kind of a lot of times when people come in and they're looking for, really good records about their family, I say, well, don't you want to find something bad, like a murder, or like, it makes it interesting. So I think that's always good. Okay, so some of these things are going to be animations that I made over the years for exhibits. This is for an exhibit that was supposed to go virtual, but it never did. We experimented a little bit, but it never actually went online. But after I read that quote, this is where I came to this idea for this exhibit, that mortality in New Mexico, death is just the beginning. And this is just a little animation that I made for that. There was also a dissertation that I read around that time, or not too long after that, and that was by Martina Volta-Chaparro, and I don't know how many of you have heard of her, but her book was mentioned yesterday in the forum, and that's Death and Dying in New Mexico, and her dissertation is probably one of the best pieces of work that I think I've ever read. I read it before it was in print form, and I just bought that today, so if any of you want to look at it, it's $20 in the next room, but she really has some pioneering research as far as collecting records and putting together how cemeteries were actually established, and they talked about that a little bit, like where people were buried in the churches, if it was in the walls, if it was in the floors. But this is also from an exhibit. Most of these are going to be from exhibits, but in some of these images, what I tried to do was I tried to focus on the darker words, and as you can see, I focused on cadavers, or cadavers, I don't know how you say it. So this is a royal order of Charles V regarding the establishment of cemeteries. And this is Spanish Archives of New Mexico Series 2. And I actually do have this record to pass around. And of course they're copies. The originals are kept in the inner vault, and in order to get access to them, I have to either ask my boss, Melissa Salazar, the Archives Division Director, or the head of the agency, John Salazar. So those are the two people that have the key to that vault. There's also a 1791 order. this is the next slide, but there's also a 1791 order for the establishment. Actually, it's a report from Pedro de Nava from Chihuahua calling for the report for outdoor cemeteries. And they were trying to figure out, how people were getting buried, and this is a royal order from Pedro de Nava. And this is Spanish Archives of New Mexico, Series 2. And these are the only actual Spanish Archives documents that I got in. This one's actually from the Territorial Archives of New Mexico. And all of these footnotes I did get when I read Martina's book. And I, of course, had to look these up, and they became part of my exhibit. And you'll see some more slides a little bit later, but this is a 1903. In 1903, the legislature defeated a bill to prevent the desecration of graves with corpses. So this is a very interesting document, and it's illegal now. Even there's a lot of laws about desecrating graves. So this is a very cool bill that was introduced to the legislature. This is a 2007 exhibit. I think one of the funnest exhibits I think I've ever worked on, probably. I had a lot of fun with this one. Relic of a Spirit. And the title went through a lot of transitions because, as you all know, I've already said I'm not a historian, I'm an archivist. And I respect the historians who I work with on a daily basis. And I asked a lot of them for their opinion because I was going to use a strong word in this exhibit, and I actually say that Governor Bent was assassinated, which a lot of historians didn't like, but I think I finally went with the title that Robert suggested. I don't know if you remember it, but I think I had said that it was going to be Relic of a Spirit, the assassination of New Mexico's first governor. And then with the help of Robert, and like I say, I did ask a few people, but Robert did suggest that maybe I say the first governor under United States occupation. So I ended up going with that title. And of course I wanted to do this animation because I wanted it to seem like he was coming out of, this is now the museum, this is the home where he was actually murdered. So I wanted it to look like he was coming out of there, and that's why I did that. There are 3 things that I will pass around regarding Ben, and I'll talk a little bit more about that exhibit in him, but this is Territorial Archives of New Mexico. This is when he was actually the notice when he became governor. And then I'm going to pass around an image of his tombstone. And this has information. He's buried in the Santa Fe National Cemetery. I don't know how many of you know that, but this is a little bit of information about him. He did marry Ignacia Jaramillo, and she did witness him being